Ideal Protein is a doctor-designed, coach-led ketogenic weight loss protocol that uses food as medicine to empower you to lose weight and live your healthiest life.
And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show, a podcast brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news, and today I am joined by one of our legislative delegation from the Livingston Parish area. I'm going to let him introduce himself, so if anyone's listening to this podcast, you can put a voice to a name. So please, sir, good morning. Thanks for joining us, and give us a little intro here.
Absolutely. Good morning, and thank you for having me. Buddy Mincey Jr., I'm the representative, House Representative, District 71, and I cover the Denver Springs and the Walker area.
And today we're going to be talking, just to kind of give people a brief overview, we're going to be talking about last year, which was your first year and an interesting one at that. And then we're going to pull it forward. We're going to talk about the session coming up this year, which begins April 12th. So first and foremost, tough race, very contested. You pull out the victory by a considerable margin, and then you get into the legislature and COVID hits. And, you had a variety of bills last year. We're going to talk about that in a second. But one of the big ones that we will discuss is the one that dealt with, and as you kind of described it, it was kind of a bear, was with regard to schools and their liability with regard to COVID. That was a big deal. It kind of helped kids get back in school and athletes back on the field to a certain extent. But first, I want to talk about you kind of came out of the gate last year with a lot of committee appointments, which provides some leverage, but it's also a lot of responsibility. So first, if you can, list off some of the committee assignments you've had, and then we want to talk about, what it's like to be on all those committees and what kind of leverage it gives you.
So I'm on the Ways and Means. I'm on Natural Resources, and I'm also on Agriculture. Those are regular standing committees. One committee that I had talked to the speaker about, before I was appointed, they call everybody in and ask them where they want to go. And of course, I had mentioned education. It was a natural for me. But the speaker thought I needed to be on Ways and Means, and he put me there. And I told him I'd serve wherever he needed me. But a couple other committees that we've been, really, really active on, our Homeland Security. That was one that we was put on that has been that's been really, really busy. And with all the hurricanes and with the COVID and everything, we did a considerable amount of work in that committee.
So you're also on the COMEET task force, correct?
Correct.
We'll talk more about that because for those of you who are listening, Mr. Mincey did host a education summit for drainage. We're going to be doing a whole other podcast after we take a break from this one. So please stick around for that later. But you're on the GOP committee, right?
Yes.
Yes. What was that like last year? Just in terms of, there was some interesting, I'm not going to ask you for any of the details because some of them you probably can't even talk about, but there was a lot of contention leading up to the session, but it looked like, at least with that first session, things got smoothed out and things started to roll. Was that kind of your feeling on it?
Yes. So let me just expand a little bit. I was a school board member for 13 years, proudly representing our parish. And I was very engaged, very active in the legislative process. All of our legislative delegations, I was always, every session, engaged with them on issues that we had from a school perspective. So I dealt with the Rogers Popes and the Dale Erdies and the Clay Shea Snyders all the time. And we talked shop a lot. And so when I was elected, I really thought I knew what being a legislator was going to be about. But you have no way of knowing until your foot steps on that chamber floor.
Sure.
The dynamics, the Capitol, just, all the different interests. And it's just different, So it started off, great. We started the session off. We were, I think, 460 million in surplus. We were all high fiving each other, and and glad for the capital outlay projects we was going to do. We were talking about teachers' raise, and COVID hits. A week later, and we're out for 4 or 5 weeks, whatever it was, and we come back and we're $1 billion in the hole. So it changed, very quickly on us. And one of my colleagues, when we got back, we were talking about it, and he said, "Man, we picked a horrible time to be a legislator." And I'm like, no, I said, I think we picked a great time. This is when the state needs us. This is where we need to be. And I took it at that.
A little bit of trial by fire, huh?
Absolutely trial by fire. COVID changed everything, and I commend our speaker. Our speaker's done a really good job, his leadership, over the House of Representatives. But he was determined to try to take care of business as usual, and we tried to get through as many bills as we could, and that was tough. I mean, when you're trying to prepare, I'm one of the ones that reads my bills, and when you're trying to read all these bills before the next day, and you try to be as informed as you can, it's difficult. And I think there were 2 days we had 9.5 hours of debate alone on bills, and it's you drinking from a fire water hose, so it's tough, but we made it.
I like that analogy. You're sitting there drinking from the fire water hose, just trying to stay in the game.
Absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
like little backyard there. So, want to go through a couple of your other bills real quick before we talk about school liability and things like that. The first one, HB 136. Now, all these are from last year. We're doing a brief overview of last year, 2020. Was with regard to, I guess you can say, a certain black eye on the parish. That was adulterating food. And, that came off of that Dennis and Cynthia Perkins issue, I would imagine. Was that something where that happened? It was involved with kids, and you kind of thought from your background in education, this was something that you needed to do?
Yeah, so yeah, that's unfortunate that we experienced that. But whenever I was involved, I was a school board member at the time, and whenever it was disclosed to me that the some of the things that were being done were basically no more than misdemeanors. That they didn't have anything on the books to address it. They were such horrible things that were done that they weren't even in statutes. And it was my goal at that time to correct that. And I worked with the Attorney General's office, and they helped us put together a bill that I'm pretty proud of.
So the other one, and I do want to say, obviously a legislator's job is to represent his area, but you do that on a lot of very micro kind of situations. They're all, directly trying to help some of these offices sort of expand. We're going to talk a little bit about that from last year, but it also comes forward this year, which we'll talk about as well. But the second one was simply to allow the Livingston Parish Clerk of Court's office, which has its own budget, to purchase its own vehicle. For a lot of people, that may seem like that's a waste of a bill, but it actually frees up a lot of legislative leeway for both Jason Harris, our local clerk of court, and for the parish council, who was like, we have to put this on the agenda and approve it. That seems like a waste of time. So tell us a little bit about the conversation you had with those two bodies.
Yeah, so the clerks, that bill specifically, there was a handful of parishes in the state that did not have to go back to their other governing body, the parish council, whatever, to get approval. And my bill amended and added Livingston into that bill. Another thing that the bill did was there was a stipulation in there that Livingston was the only one that was limited. We couldn't purchase a vehicle for our clerk's office over $18,900, whatever it was. It was obviously a very outdated bill. You can't buy much for that nowadays, and so we removed that stipulation, and it was something that the clerk had asked me to sponsor. But there was another bill that I did for the parish that was real personal. The parish council got with me, and we passed a bill. I forget which one it is. I have them written down here. HB 583.
Yep.
It was so if you recall, the Public Housing Authority in Baton Rouge, they years ago they expanded their outreach, their boundary, to include 7 or 8 parishes, which included us. Their governing body was the Metro Council,
right?
And they were able to make property tax decisions for these other 7 or 8 parishes on developments that were potentially in their area. So the parish council actually, current chairman Frog Talbert got with me and asked me to sponsor legislation to correct that. So that's another one that was real close to home.
Sure.
That we changed that legislation, and now they cannot make decisions outside their governing body.
So the next one, which is 655, is interim superintendent of public schools, which again hits close to home for you. Former school board member at the time. And of course, there was it wasn't that long ago that Joe Murphy was hired, but there was an interim superintendent, which I believe was him. So tell us a little bit about what you were what your goal was with that particular bill.
Yeah, oddly enough, there was no guidelines and statutes on the interim superintendent position. It referenced it, but nothing was set up. So we passed legislation that provided some hiring provisions, as well as some deadlines for their tenure, if you will. How long they could serve, that type of thing.
Sure. So, one of the things that you noticed early on going into this session was that, and maybe you pulled this from your past experience, you saw that as a school board member and as a person involved in the parish's business, there were a lot of things that just didn't have provisions on the books. Nobody really knew how, they were kind of handled ad hoc, if you will.
Right.
So that covered the regular session. Of course, we had an extra session because kind of trying to see how COVID would fully affect the economy and that kind of thing. And this was I don't want to be dramatic. I was going to say it was your magnum opus, but that's a little dramatic. But this was your big one, right? And we're talking about HB 59, and I want to hear it from you. I'm not going to give an overview. I want to hear it from you. What you were hearing from the local school board, local people in the schools, and how you use that to draft legislation.
So, our session, the first bills that we filed, we had pre-filed that all before, session had started. So, our regular session, our special sessions was our opportunity to make some adjustments to help the state recover. We did some things, fiscally. But, there was a lot of liability concern and a lot of liability. Our school systems are taxed for their resources. They're limited. And there was a big concern about their liability for people just going to school and people, claiming I got it from the schools. So I was, approached and discussed with some folks about doing this for public schools. We're going to limit the liability, and then it grew, as the public schools, charter schools want to be a part of it, and the parochial schools want to be a part of it. And while I'm on the House floor fixing to pass the bill, higher ed jumped in and said, hey, we want that protection as well. So, that was a pretty big deal for us. I'll tell you that I had many legislators that came to me and said that my superintendent said that we wouldn't have school unless we had this protection, and including our superintendent. He was really concerned about it. So it was a big deal, you just saw recently there's some reports come out that I think our state is 7th in the nation on having kids back in school. And I think the proactiveness of our state in passing that bill and providing that protection helped. But another thing that it did was, we required Bessie to develop some guidelines to protect our students and our staff and board of supervisors on higher ed. So I think we did it right, and it was a bad time for me, actually. To get that through, because there was just so just uncertain things that was going on about it. And at one time or another, I think everybody involved in that bill either supported it or opposed it, sometimes at the same time during the day. And but we got it through. And I do want to take a moment to commend our Senate Ed Chairman Cleo Fields and Beth Mizell. They amended my bill in the Senate to put the stipulations in for Bessie and the Board of Supervisors to create those guidelines. I was real concerned about it. I thought it was going to kill my bill in the House. And so I tried to convince them otherwise, but they thought it was the right thing to do. And I thought it was the right thing to do. But I thought the bill without that component was better than no bill at all. So I objected to it, but we went forward with it, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. So it was good to be able to work with the senators and find a compromise, and it worked out for us.
How did you use that as sort of a springboard to acquire? And I don't have the exact number, but there's an AG's opinion that was based on sports and getting sports going. How did you use that as sort of a springboard into that?
So, it takes a lot of attorneys to negotiate and look through that and navigate through that wording. But, from all the opinions that we had, there was nothing in Act 59 that stopped us from playing football. And it was fall sports. That was a big deal. But LHSAA was being conservative, and they didn't want to, in my opinion, they didn't want to subject the school systems to unnecessarily liabilities. So it was something that was holding them up. But I had actually requested an opinion from the Attorney General, and he gave it to us, and said that those Bessie guidelines did not stop us from having football, and thankfully we were able to start football.
So the last piece of legislation we're going to talk about last year before we kind of move into sort of a learning what you learned and how you're going to move into next year is, it's HR 20, and we're talking about transparency here. It's some interesting language, so I'd like for you to take a moment to explain it, but this was a special session bill that you passed.
Yeah, so and it was special the way it came up. Actually, I'd always heard over the years about bills being dropped. We have a constitutional obligation to adjourn by a certain day at 6 o'clock, and historically, I'd always heard in the legislature that that bills get dropped strategically. Sometimes it's just because negotiations take you to the last minute, but they physically drop the bill 5 minutes before you have to adjourn. So it forces you to vote up or down, and sometimes these bills are pretty intense, and it really limits your ability to be able to weed through it. So first session we had I voted for a bad bill. Our tort reform we turned out the first time. I think it ended up being amended, and it wasn't the best instrument for us to pass. But it was literally given to us 10 minutes before we had to adjourn. And not only that, but there was a motion made that that limited the discussion. So tort reform was a big thing for us last year in our first session, and so we had to vote yes or no without having time to look at it and sort through it. So the bill passed. The governor vetoed it, and it ended up being a good thing that he vetoed. So, although I had heard all these years about that being dropped on you, I never experienced it from my first time. So I started talking to leadership. I started talking about seasoned legislators about making a change, and I was advised you probably can't do that. It's not going. This is the way it's always been. But I set forth on it and worked with staff, and so we require them to drop a bill within 2 hours of adjournment. And if you do it less than that, because sometimes negotiations are taking place literally at the last minute, but there's an extra step that you have to go through. But another thing we did was, we have when we send a bill to the Senate and the Senate doesn't agree and they amend it, then we send it to a conference committee, and 3 people from the House and 3 people from the Senate go and they make the final decision. Now they can change that bill, incorporate things into that bill that has nothing to do with the original intent. They can do whatever they want, their discretion. So when it comes back, you're voting up or down. And sometimes things are slipped in there and you don't know about it. So I added a stipulation in there that if there's anything that wasn't germane to the original bill, which means it was the original intent, then the clerk actually announces that to us. And then, things are busy on when we're in session, and people are moving, a lot of moving parts. And sometimes you've got members of that committee that vote for it, and sometimes they don't. So I also put a stipulation in there where she announces that. So in the heat of the battle, when everything's going on, it's just a couple little steps to, I think, increase transparency to us as legislators, and give us an opportunity to make the proper vote.
So, kind of interesting something you brought up there. Want to sort of use this as a segue into talking about your first year. That's the way we've always done it. You brought up that statement, and it was one of those things that you wanted to challenge, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So your first year was full of trials and tribulations, a little bit of chaos because of COVID, but it actually turned into kind of a red letter year for you. I want to read these out real quick. You were I closed it on myself here, Patrick Henry Outstanding Family Advocate for votes on life, liberty, and limited government, 100% from the Louisiana Family Forum. You were the most valuable policymaker from LABI, or Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, and recently announced, some of you might have seen it in the paper or on our website, you were Legislator of the Year for the Louisiana School Board Association. So tell us a little bit about how it felt to kind of have, as you said, a bear of a piece of legislation, which would have been HB 59, which was the liability issue, and going through that, navigating that, how that felt, and then how it felt to be sort of, I guess you could say, rewarded after that. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the first two, the Family Forum and LABI, they have a scorecard that they do, and there's a whole series of bills that they they basically score you based on your support of their position. And Family Forum does the family values, and of course, Lobby is business oriented. But you don't know what they're going to score you on. So throughout the year you make votes, and at the end of the year they tabulate on what they decide how the ones they're gonna judge you on, and they come out with their ratings. So I was proud to be 100% in both those categories, but there were some bills that I voted against what their opinion was. It just happened to not be the ones that they scored me on. So I was 100% with both this year. I may not be that next year. The legislator of the year for the school board was a big honor for me. As a school board member for 13 years, I was able to see the legislators that reached out and helped, and I knew how important it was to have people to be able to listen to you and be open to your issues, and for them to recognize me, it was an honor, very much an honor.
What did you learn the first year? You had a big year. You had a pretty good year considering the circumstances as a first-year legislator. What did you learn bringing into year two before we talk about some of the bills that you filed?
Again, I'll have to reflect back on the fact that I thought I was pretty prepared to be a legislator, but walking in and seeing the dynamics play out in front of you it's trying for a legislator. I'll tell you that one of the most surprising thing for me and serving was the people. We have some phenomenal people up there at the Capitol. Our legislative staff is phenomenal. We have some phenomenal legislators. I mean, we have some really good people, some that I have become really good friends with. And but on the flip side, there's some that are out there that are self-serving and doing things for political gains for their own personal use. And I think the biggest thing that I learned out of all of it is just the relationship and integrity that you have to have, for yourself. Do the right thing and vote for the right reasons. And I'm very open-minded with really all issues, even issues that I'm very passionate about. But I consider other people's opinions. And in fact, you and we served through a leadership Livingston class
Mm-hmm.
together, and the second class I had, and that really helped me as an elected official. I'm a Denham Springs guy. Everybody knows that. I like to pick at all my surrounding neighbors about that, and I looked at everything through my purple and gold goggles. But that leadership class, when we went around and we saw all the things throughout the parish, just in my parish alone, it it made me, for the first time, I knew we were different, but the first time I accepted that we were different.
Sure.
And people's perspectives that are not yours are important. You got to take them into consideration, and sometimes you can learn from them. So it made me a better school board member, and I think I took that as to the legislator, and that's helped me as well. So building those relationships, knowing who you can trust, who you can't trust, who you can work with, and just being, just doing your best. And I've always tried to serve that way, and I think it served me well my first year.
So coming into year two, the session starts April 12th. Today is April Fool's Day. I've already been got about 5 times. Unfortunately, in media, we have to take all these things seriously, and I think people know that. They relish in the fact that I'm texting them like, "What is this? Why didn't you tell me?" Ha ha ha. No, thanks a lot. So I love my job.
Right.
So you've got about 10 days until the session starts, and I believe y'all are June 4th sign die, which is the end of the session. Got to sign off by 6 p.m. You've currently got, it looks like you're maxed out on your bills that you pre-filed. Let's first talk about one of the ones we talked about, hyper-local bills that affect your here in Livingston Parish. First one on the docket, which we've talked about briefly, you and I on the phone in the past, is the tourism board.
Correct.
And I'm gonna let you run with it. It's pretty simple. There are 7 members on the board, 9 members on the council. Take it away.
So we actually considered this bill last session. Local bills have a deadline that's before all the other bills from a filing standpoint, and it was brought to me after the deadline had already passed last year. And it does just as simply as you described. There's seven current appointments from council members, and there's 9 council members. So they asked me to increase it by 2, which we're hoping to do. and that just allows them to have fair representation on that board from around the parish.
And what's interesting about that one is the two people that do not have appointments are Scooter Keene in District 3 and Frog Talbert in District 2. Frog has Tiki Tubing, and Scooter Keene has North Park and technically South Park, although he shares that with Bubba, but it's under the same rec district. So kind of interesting that those two don't have an appointment on a board but have two very big draws, especially with the park having recently bought a golf course. So this one was interesting. I wanted to ask you about it. It looks like you have tobacco education. Tell us about that.
So, this is a fiscal session, and we only have 5 general bills. And I had quite a few bills that I have not filed yet that I was working on. And so I had a full slate pretty early. And I was approached by an administrator, one of our school systems, and said, "Buddy, we need some help." And they said, vaping is it's a big problem in our schools. And we want you to increase the age from 18 to 21. So I told him, I said, well, I described the session. I said, I don't have many bills. I don't know if I want to fight the tobacco industry on that bill. I said, but I tell you what, do a survey of your campus and come back and tell me how big a problem it is for you. And they did that, and the results were pretty staggering for me, and it was staggering enough that I felt it was worthwhile for it to be one of my bills. And we expanded that survey throughout the parish. Our results were pretty consistent. I reached out to our superintendent association and asked them to ask other superintendents around the state if it was a problem, and the resounding response was absolutely. So we have a bill, this is Tobacco 21, if you will. This bill was tried in 2019, but it failed. And what it basically does, right now you got to be 21 to buy alcohol. This requires you to be 21 to buy tobacco products, including vaping. When in 2019 it failed, but since then the federal government has come out and they've come out with their Tobacco 21, and they mandate that all states get in compliance. There's only 17, I think, in the nation that are not in compliance right now. They give you 2 or 3 years to get in compliance. If you don't, then you start losing funds. So, the bigger concern is for me is not the funding, but is what's happening to our youth out there. So I have a Tobacco 21 bill that's coming out, and I think it's going to be supported because it's the right thing to do. We don't have a choice, but I think it's the right thing to do. And then there's an educational component that comes off of that, and there's a current curricular requirement that says that you have to have a curriculum for substance abuse and all those types of things. This just adds the vaping products into the existing requirements.
Want to clarify a point here. You did say that the federal government has come out with mandates regarding this. I mean, I appreciate what you said about schools, but, Louisiana gets a lot of federal funding, and this is a mandate that would keep you in compliance with that funding, correct? I want to make sure we heard that correctly.
That is correct. After you reach that deadline, and
Right.
which I think we may have a couple of years in there. In our schools right now, I thought you had to be 21 to buy tobacco products because most of our stores, most of our convenience stores, or our bigger stores require that already. But it's not statutory required. So we've got some that are not. And at our schools, they see the vaping products coming in, and they've got older students there. So it's something that we're just trying to get in compliance with, but also help the health of our students.
Sure. And another one of those things where they're looking to put something on the books as
Absolutely.
a real requirement. Another one looking to be put on the books. This one's interesting. I did not know this. It's your hit and run bill. Very curious here. And again, another bill about liability. You seem to get dragged into these. I'm sure you love championing that. So tell us, first, give us a little bit of background on what the liability is for both drivers in a hit and run, which is kind of the basis for this bill, and what you're looking to change.
Well, so actually, this one comes to me from a personal experience. My daughter was involved in a hit and run. My daughters were involved in a hit and run, and the other driver that hit them, they all slowed down. They pulled over on the side of the road. Going to be the responsible thing. He merged onto them, and then he sped off. And fortunately, they were able to get their driver's license. Well, we called it in. Charges were filed for hit and run. And but then when it got down to paying for the vehicles, their insurance company told us, hey, this he said, she said deal. Although there was hit and run charges filed, you take care of your vehicle, we'll take care of ours. And it's it's just not right. So I actually appealed through our insurance commissioner, and the insurance company made it right. But it shouldn't be an insurance company making that decision. So I wanted to do something with hit and run liability. There's a presumption of fault. If you hit somebody and you flee, the presumption is that you're at fault. Now, that's not ironclad. It's not black and white. There's gray areas in all these things, and that presumption of fault enables people who may not have been at fault to be able to work that out through the court system.
Very interesting. I mean, you would think that if a police report is filed and someone's found at fault, there'd be an issue, but kind of one of those things where you kind of tell your kids, if you get pulled over, yes ma'am and no ma'am, that's it. So the problem with it especially is the message it's sending. Now it's saying, well, get out of there, and deal with it later, because there's no police report to file other than a hit and run, and maybe you're going to be guilty, maybe you're not. So that's a problem.
Yeah, but I do want to say that, there are situations where, someone may not want to stop. You may be involved in an accident, and there's a security issue. You may not be in a safe area. There's accidents that are staged, that people are purposely hitting people in certain areas and doing whatever after the fact, after they get out. If there's a situation like that someone is not safe or not comfortable and they leave, hey, you call and you call a police report and report it afterwards. This is not going to penalize those types of situations.
Okay.
But if you are at fault and you hit somebody and you leave and it's not a security issue, the presumption is you're at fault.
So, the last one we've got on here is something that's been sort of tossed back and forth a lot lately, and that's school choice. You didn't give me any kind of primer on this one, so I'm going to be interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, so school choice, I actually hadn't dropped that bill yet. Our deadline to file bills is tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and I'm still working with staff on some drafts, so we've got some revisions on it. But last year there was an attempt made. I think Ben Nevers had filed a bill originally years ago that allowed people to go from school system to school system, parish to parish, if you will, district to district, provided there was a C, D, and F. They can leave and go to an A or B. And it was provided that there was space available, and those school systems agreed to it. And there was an attempt made last year to force that to go to Bessie as an arbitrary, if you will. So if if someone applies to move from one school to another, and the school system denies it, then what was attempted last year was that they can go to Bessie and appeal it, and Bessie would make that determination. And I don't think that's the right thing for Livingston Parish, and I don't think it's the right thing for our state. So what my bill does, my bill simply just says, if both parties agree, if the district where the kid resides and the district where the kid wants to go agree to it, then the kid can transfer. So it's a school autonomy. It's local autonomy. And it's the right thing to do. And look, we all know how devastating that would be to our school system. We have a great school system, and if we're growing and we try to stay ahead of growth and we do all the proactive things that our parish does, and if someone wanted to come in here from any surrounding area that they don't pay taxes here, they don't live here, there's a chance that they could apply, get denied, and appeal and go to Bessie, and Bessie will tell us to take them. And that's just not good for Livingston Parish. And I don't think it's good for our school systems through the state. I'm real big on that local autonomy. I have 13 years as a school board member. I know what it's like to have Department of Education and the State Department and legislators shove things down your throats. But we have to be able to be in the best position to protect our interests too. And so that's what this school choice bill is.
So that was your list of bills. You've got a couple of resolutions on here. One is with regard to veteran affairs, and I believe your intent in this is to try to push the state in a direction to get veterans off the streets, correct? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I was actually attending a Denham Springs Kiwanis meeting, and we had a presenter there, and they were talking about homeless veterans. They was actually specifically talking about homeless women veterans. and how we did not have any facilities for them through the state. And I listened to the presentation, and then I contacted, our Colonel Strickland. He is the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and I told him I had a concern based on what I was told. I said, let's meet and let's talk about it, and let's see if there's an issue, and then if there's something that we can do. So, I sat down with him and his staff. We probably had a 3-hour meeting, and we really, went through and scrutinized every issue you can possibly imagine with our homeless veterans. And from their perspective, they thought the best thing that they could do was to hire a person. Then some of their duties would be specifically for the homeless veterans. There's other things that they can do, but that would be their focus. And of course, look, we're always trying to downsize local government, state governments, and I'm not one to just to impose that, and unless you have a need. So we talked about what we could do about it, and we decided to do a study research, and a resolution, and that's what they're going to do. They're tasked with looking at that and seeing actually if a person is needed, and define those duties, and then they report back to legislators, and then it would be up to us as whether we support it or not.
That's interesting. And it kind of interesting to get a little bit of background on, some of the process that you go through when you see an issue, how you approach it. You call the people that are involved, you have a meeting with them, you try to decide some sort of consensus, and then you bring it to the legislature. Now, a quick point of reference, as a resolution, it's not necessarily binding, but maybe a point to move forward, correct?
Absolutely. It would be binding for them to do the study,
Right.
But it would not be anything legislatively. Now, when they report back to us, if they come back and they said, yeah, you know what, we need an extra person, and this is what they're going to do, this is what their duties are going to be, and this is what we think we can do with it, then we have the opportunity at that time, maybe to do something appropriations or whatever it may be. But it just, let's identify the problem, let's verify it is a problem, and then we'll try to have a corrective action for it.
So last but certainly not least is another resolution about a teacher task force. I don't have a primer on this one either, so I'm going to let you kind of roll with it.
Yeah, so again, my background in education, especially in a parish where public education is, I still say it's our economic engine for our parish. I've seen the trends. I've seen, where we used to have as a parish, we'd have 10 spots open for the year, and we'd have 500 applicants, and now we're begging people to apply. I've been to graduations at Southeastern. I've seen 10 years ago we had 3 times the graduates that were in education than we have right now. I've had countless conversations with educators, superintendent, principals about how difficult it is to find teachers. And I've also seen firsthand, teachers who went into the profession because they love teaching, and things have changed so much that they tell their kids now, don't become an educator. And so we have some issues, and I think we are at a teacher shortage, and I think it's just going to get progressively worse, which makes systems hire more non-certified teachers, and I'll ask for a study, and we're gonna have a task force. It started off as a study resolution, but I think it was important enough after talking to all the stakeholders to do a task force. And we're going to drill down, and we're going to try to identify every single aspect as to why we're having less college students graduating in education, and why our teachers are retiring. So, we want to do more to retain them and recruit them. It's a recovery, task force. So it's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for us to do something. And the stakeholders are involved. You talked about getting involved. Look, I've talked to superintendent associations. I've talked to HR associations. I've talked to the board of regents. I've talked to school boards. I've talked to state superintendent. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to about this issue just to get to the point where we're going to have it. So it's going to be a good thing.
Trying to consensus build before you even get to the floor.
Yeah, it truly, all the bills that I do, for the most part, I'm real big at engaging my opponent, if you will, or who may oppose it. Again, we all have different perspectives. And I think if we can take those things, if I could take those different perspectives into consideration, I may not agree with them, but ultimately it will enable me to have better legislation. So I really do everything I can to engage everybody that I possibly can imagine before I put legislation forward. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes strategically you got to put something and you don't want it to be announced. But I give you Tobacco 21, for instance. I've dealt with convenience store associations, the tobacco folks, the vaping folks, the school systems, the LDH, American Heart Association. I can't tell you. I mean, I have really, and I've asked them all for input on what I can do to make this the best bill possible. It's so easy as a legislator to impose your will on people, and then they have to suffer the consequences, whatever that may be. Sometimes they're improvements, and sometimes they're not. And I really take the end user into consideration, and I try to get input from all parties, and I try to be as open minded as I can.
Speaking of education and open-mindedness and things of that nature, you mentioned earlier, and I'm gonna wrap it up with this question. You mentioned earlier, you kind of see through your purple and gold glasses for Denham Springs High School. Currently, within the district, there is a renewal for a millage, and I believe you were part of the school board when this was first passed. It was used to build Jubin Park Jr. and Elementary. Those bonds have been paid off. The millage is up for renewal. The district is looking to renew that tax to acquire bonds to build sports facilities on campus. I'd like to hear if you are, what your stance is. I have a feeling I know what it is. But to kind of talk a little bit, because you've had kids go through the Denham school system, go through Denham High. They've played softball at North Park and stuff like that. So would like to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I really know a lot about this bill because I was elected in 2006 as a school board member, and I had a proposition for the property bond issues to build the Jubin Park schools the very next year, and then it was able to be a part of designing the schools, and so it served its purpose. I think in the Denham Springs area, we've done a phenomenal job with our facilities. At Denham Springs High School, we've put a lot of effort into academics, and we've also done a lot of efforts over the years with the sports facilities. But we have other needs, and we have other opportunities to make that better. And I commend the Denham Springs School Board members for bringing this to the public and having them a chance to vote on it. And I look forward to what they're going to be able to do to it. And I know it's going to be, look, we have great facilities in our parish. And anytime we can provide better facilities for our kids, our student athletes, academically, whatever it may be, I think that's a great opportunity. But the people will decide, and I think it's going to be good for Denham Springs.
Well, Representative Mincey, we appreciate you joining us. If you'd introduce yourself again as we do a little introduction here.
Yeah. So one more thing, and I
ahead.
may not have told you about. We might have discussed. I've also got something that I'm working on with the interstate barrier. As we all know, we flooded in 2016. We all know there's a lawsuit that's out there, a class action lawsuit. And my discussions with what the path forward is, it come to light that there is no solution right now, no engineering solution for what the existing structures, how we retrofit that. So I'm actually working towards getting something together to research it and to determine what that option would be. And also figure out how much it's going to cost us and just see what our options are. So I haven't dropped that one yet. It's something that I'm working on, but I think it's extremely important to our community.
Well, yes, absolutely, because I know that the lawsuit itself is stalled.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not stalled out, but it is stalled. So trying to find other options is important.
Absolutely.
So again, we appreciate your time. We're speaking about that. I'm gonna get you to bring that back up. He and I are going to take a quick break, and then we'll be doing a separate podcast on his drainage summit. So again, Representative Mincey, appreciate you joining us to talk about the upcoming legislative session. If you'll reintroduce yourself again real quick.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I'm start all over.
Yeah, just say I'm Oh, no. We're going to wrap this one up, but this is just for those who are listening. So just say I'm Representative Mincey.
I got you. Yeah. So this is Representative Buddy Mincey, District 71, Denham Springs, Walker area, and it was my pleasure to be able to talk to you about my view as a legislator.
And again, my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us for the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show. Please remember we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube once a week in print on Thursdays at $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. And we are also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. Would ask that you go check out the series of podcasts that we have been doing on the millage renewal. We will have the 2 school board members, one next week, one the week after, but we've done 4 coaches. 3 have already run. Mr. Brett the Viking Beard will be coming out tomorrow. That is Friday, April 2nd. So please stick around. We'll be right back with you talking about drainage. Thank you.